All right, don't expect a particularly advanced talk here, and hopefully it'll be more polished by the time I do it at HackerCon. I got a lot of research to do on this, but I decided to present on something that is a common vulnerability I see out there. It's nothing completely advanced, but people keep screwing it up. So the title of this talk is Check Your Privileges, Futzing with File Shares for Low-Hanging Fruit. First of all, a little bit about me. My name is Crenshaw, and I run IronGeek.com. I have an interest in InfoSec education. Don't know everything. I'm just a geek with time in my hands. I may get something wrong. Let me know. When it comes to Windows file share configuration and how it's changed over every version of Windows that's come out in the last 15 years, I'm probably a little behind times because we're not just talking about XP, or we're not talking about 2000 XP, Vista, 7, 8, 8.1. We're talking about the home versions of each one. We're talking about whether or not the enterprise version of each one, whether or not they're hooked to a domain. So it gets confusing real quick. Also, I'm a senior information security consultant at TrustedSec, send us work, and I'm a co-founder of DerbyCon. Okay, so why this talk? When I talked to some Ninja Master a little bit about the con, he wanted something that was kind of basic, something that would be good intro for people. And I thought, well, open file shares. That's one of the ways I get into a lot of networks. It's silly, it's simple, but see, who cares about being domain admin if you can get to a corporation's data? Okay, I'm not domain admin. I have a list of everybody's salaries, all your reports as far as what profits are going on, who you're spending what money on, a list of your passwords that may or may not be admin accounts, but I can get to them because somehow or another you saved them in an Excel file. There's tons of things you can get to via open file share without ever being a domain admin. Okay, my ego does care a little bit if I can't get domain admin. It's got to the point where the last few engagements I've been on, I've been getting domain admin, so at this point, if I don't get that, I feel a little bad. But it's not 100% necessary to get actual corporate data. I mean, I know someone in this audience who works for a certain company that does some credit card processing. If I got to a bunch of credit card information without actually becoming a domain admin, it would still be just as bad. And better believe it, some people will save a file out there. There used to be a paper mill I worked for, and student social security numbers actually got saved out on an open file share because no one was locking the stuff down. That kind of thing happens. As long as you can get the data, hey, that's what's important. Also, besides that, a lot of people leave open file shares that are read-write permissions. Trojan some EXEs. I've seen plenty of times where you see something like an install for a software application, or maybe someone's version of PuTTY that's left in the profile. So you could Trojan that version of PuTTY. Probably the only person who's going to be using PuTTY on a corporate network is one of the admins, or someone at least in IT. So Trojan that with a Metasploit and send stuff back to you. Or you could also, in cases of really badly configured open file shares, add your own SSH keys. So let's say you can't crack the local password, add your own SSH key if they have really poor open file shares on let's say a Samba server, or I think in particular I saw this on a box once that was it wasn't actually Samba, it wasn't SMB, it was a NFS file share. But the same principle would apply. Put that there, don't need another password, you can still log in as root. Also, another reason for this talk is vulnerabilities get patched, bad configurations happen forever. Whenever vulnerability is common out there right now, hopefully eventually as systems die and our OSs get upgraded, will slowly go away. Yeah, there's some that will be there forever. Anything involving DCOM is going to be there for a little bit, But slowly over time they go away. Bad configurations like silly passwords, that's been in the industry forever. And people configuring something for the most permissions allowable so that they don't have to worry about a user not being able to get to the data they need, that kind of misconfiguration is always going to be out there. The default any rules on firewalls that essentially make them routers, that's always going to exist. Because it's not necessarily a direct software vulnerability to be patched. It's a configuration mistake for the sake of convenience. Everybody screws this up, including me, as far as file sharing is concerned. So a little bit about file sharing. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about SMB, Service Message Block Protocol. It kind of involved into CIFS. I'm trying to think of, some put out some kind of competitor. I want to call it, I think maybe it was WebFS, and Microsoft decided to start rebranding SMB to kind of fill that niche. So they started calling it CIFS. It's made a few changes over the years, though. Normally communicates over 445 TCP on systems, I think, 2000 and newer, older systems. Actually, they go to that in NT4. This is one of the things I don't remember what point they started migrating to that. But also over various UDP and TCP ports, which I won't say all the names and numbers for because, well, that's boring. also used to exist over other protocols like NetBEUI. You remember installing NetBEUI on a system? Back in the day, that's old school. Also, it handles things besides just file shares, like inter-process communication. For instance, if you ever, how many people who use Metasploit regularly? You ever notice that the vulnerabilities for like PSExec and PSExec PowerShell is all listed underneath Samba? That's because it's using these sorts of capabilities. So a little bit about the history. Originally, it was invented by IBM, and Microsoft decided to use it in its answer to Novell NetWare, NetManager. Back in the day, believe it or not, the big player in networking was Novell NetWare. When was the last time you all saw a Novell server? What? The 90s? I saw it a little bit later than that because I worked at a university, but they've kind of gone the way of the dodo, except for some, hard-grained institutions that just don't move. But LAN Manager was kind of a competitor, which never, to my knowledge, got a whole bunch of market share. However, LAN Manager gave us great things like LM hashes and LAN Manager challenge response and all that. So its legacy has lived on, but it itself did not necessarily make huge headroads. But that was Microsoft's first implementation of SMB as they did it. Samba does it for various Unix environments, but there's other environments that have it as well. And it's changed a lot over the years. We talked about SMB 2, 2.1, 3. A lot of what they've done is made it less chatty, so you don't have to have those constant broadcasts. And they've done some things with how you share the file shares. I think they've done some work with making better Unicode support, but that'd be a laundry list of little changes. So why are there so many misconfigurations when people are creating open file shares? One, let's talk about Windows 2000 and XP defaults. When you used to right-click and share a file, or share a directory in Windows XP, this was the default permissions it gave to everybody. Everyone, which is a meta group, which, if I recall correctly, in Windows 2000 includes authenticated users, unauthenticated users, anyone in your domain, just pretty much everybody. And that was the default share permissions. Now, granted, it could have been locked down some by NTFS permissions at the file system level, maybe. But that's a pretty crappy default. Now, when you start talking about Windows XP, it gets a little different. They start doing more things like they had simple file sharing. The problem with the whole simple file sharing way of doing things, it was like a everything or nothing. You could share out everything to everyone as read-only, everything to everyone as read-write. Not a lot of granularity there. And I believe in XP Home, and this is where my confusion comes in, because there's so many different versions of XP, you couldn't even do this unless you were using Professional. I believe you were stuck pretty much with guest only. But you can go into the policy settings and change that, change it to classic mode, and which I believe was the default in Windows 2000. And it does have the advantage of having a little bit better security by default. When you right-clicked and shared something, at least it would be read-only to everyone. Still not great. Other bad defaults to talk about is when you share something. Well, let's say we don't do advanced sharing. Let's just say we just use share. Well, actually, no. The first one, I am showing the advanced share. If I had clicked on advanced share here, I would have got this up as the default, which is what you expect. This is on, I believe, a Windows 7 box. It's read-only, just like XP. That's not too bad. But let's say I went ahead and used that normal file sharing. I would have seen this dialog box. Okay, it looks like I'm sharing out to administrators. That's okay. I expect them to have access to everything. And I'm sharing out to myself. That makes sense. I'm cool with that. So I share this test share. And I go into its permissions, and I see everyone all of a sudden has full control. I actually did some tests on this, though, and even accounts that were administrators on my local system could not access it until I used that particular account to open up that particular file, directory one time. Then I could. Yes, this sounds confusing. I'm trying to think of how to explain this in words to you. It confused the living hell out of me when I saw it. I ran out and got an odd job, and he's like, by the time I showed him, I was like, wait, it's working as expected. Those weird things going on with permissions that I really need a flowchart from Microsoft to be able to explain how it's working. Back in 2000, you pretty much kind of knew what was going on. Now, well, there's other complications that have popped up. But I was mentioning the Everyone metagroup before. Now, my understanding from reading up on the Everyone metagroup, back in Windows 2000, it basically included everybody, including an anonymous security identifier, which my understanding would mean non-authenticated users. Someone got on your network, they scanned your network, they could get access. XP forward, my understanding, it has to be authenticated, so a local account, a domain account, something along those lines. Some testing of that doesn't seem to bear that out quite the way I read it in the original documentation. So that's something I want to play with more before HackerCon and try to figure this out. File sharing, I used to think was the simplest thing in the world because I was used to doing it for a very limited number of machines, but it actually gets to be a massive pain, especially when you start talking about things they've added on for convenience, like home group. I couldn't get home group to work. I asked on Twitter. I have I don't know how many Twitter followers at this point, 12,000 something? I have a lot. And no one said they really got it working well. They said they got it working like 2 machines at someone's house. They have problems like keeping the passwords synchronized because you have a common password for each one. And the idea is basically everybody joins this home group, and everybody in this home group you trust, and you share amongst each other on your local network. That makes things, well, I never could get it to work. I couldn't switch to a home network on some of my test machines in the amount of time I had before this talk to actually get it to function. And also there's that lack of granularity, because my understanding is you're not really sharing the individual users, you're sharing out to your home group. These are the people on your local area network who have the password to get in. And I don't think there's been much research done into breaking that particular type of password, because, well, no one's probably using it in a corporate environment, I'd hope. But what if someone is? That might be an interesting thing to research them. I mentioned before share level security and NTFS permission level security. You can secure at the share level saying what access people can have, read, write, or just read, or nothing at all. But it's also NTFS permission. So you give a share complete read-write access and still lock it down via NTFS if the person remembers to and remembers in the future that they didn't lock it down at the share level. So that adds an extra level of complexity where people will forget what they've done and screw it up. What version of Windows you're using? Like I said, the everyone group has changed from one version of Windows to another. What you can and can't do, like going into classic mode for file shares, may not be possible in some versions of Windows. So that gets all messed up. Also, a lot of these modern Microsoft operating systems want to make you, for home use, authenticate to them to be able to do it. Not like your local SAM, but to them. I once was using Skype, and all of a sudden it was asking me about setting my password. And I was like, oh, my Skype password? Okay, there you go. And set a new password. And all of a sudden it took over my entire system. It's what I log into my machine with at that point. It wasn't exactly clear. I find it annoying. But I wonder how that also interacts with some of these file sharing features. Another thing that people screw up a lot, and I see this a lot in corporate environments, is putting $sign on the end of a share to hide it. That doesn't hide it from anybody who's actually directly looking. It keeps it, I believe, from getting in the browse list, which is one of the ways you can find Windows box on the network is a master browser, which is broadcast to go out and say, hey, these are the shares I have. You ask the master browser, oh, those are the shares that other people on the network have. Now I know about them. You don't have to probe each IP. So it has some convenience factor, though sometimes it doesn't work that well. But people think putting a $sign on it will hide it from everything. If you're directly scanning it, no, the $sign does not hide it. It's basically the equivalent of setting your broadcast SID to no broadcasting on your wireless network. If people know what they're doing and there's any kind of association traffic, people are going to find the name of your network. This doesn't appear to be the same thing, though, as Samba's browsable equals no setting. If you do that, it really does seem to be invisible until you actually type in the name, though that's still pretty much security through obscurity. Also, those boxes that are outside of a Windows domain. For instance, there's ways you can configure Samba and I believe AS400s and everything to work with the authentication that you have on an NT domain, however, or Soho NAS for that matter, but are you doing it? Because it's a pain in the butt sometimes to configure. So some people end up throwing up a Samba box, oh, we want some shares, we'll share out to everyone, everybody can exchange data back and forth. And as I said before, once you can get to the data, you can get to what else really matters. I've gone in, and especially if you can get to a development server where they've shared out source code, you get connection strings galore. You get to look at the source code that might actually be out on a public website, so you can look at it for vulnerabilities. It's a whole lot easier to find SQL injection and cross-site scripting problems if you can actually look at the source code. But mainly, I use it for passwords. And you can find the password for a connection string, and sometimes people are connecting to a SQL database as a domain admin user. I don't know why, but you see that from time to time. So let's talk a little bit about finding file shares. Now, there's, of course, first of all, probably should cover how to get an account. Now, if it's a complete anonymous access system or guest level, you don't need an account. You just scan the network, and there'll be some file shares open, hopefully. This is like usually going to be badly configured Samba boxes or some Soho NASs, small office, home office NASs, which you've heard the term, what is it, rogue IT, or is it something else? Guerrilla IT, basically people who bring stuff in and hook up the boxes without telling anybody else, especially network security. So you'll find these kind of boxes out there fairly commonly, and depending on how they set them up, even if they did set up good security on the shares, did they change the default password? Go in, set the default password, or set the new password, whatever you want, or create your own account, and start looking at everybody's stuff. Also, null sessions, and this is something Larry Spooner taught me about. He's one of my coworkers. I've heard of null sessions, and I figured they'd largely gone away, because I believe they started turning that off by default in XP. Here's the way a null session works. Basically, you authenticate as blank username, blank password, and you can query all sorts of information from a domain if it's enabled. Now, I think it's been off by default since XP. However, if you originally had like a Windows 2000 domain and you kept migrating forward, my understanding is it migrates those settings forward. And surely there might be some application out there that requires null sessions, but I'm not aware of what it is. If anybody does know what out there actually requires null sessions at this point to be on, let me know. But the thing about null sessions is you can find tons of information. One of the things you can find is all the users on the network. So you reach out and you do that. First step, though, is to finding your domain controllers. You know the domain name, hopefully. You'll look that up on one of the machines or just by sniffing the directory or doing some guesswork, doing NS lookups of IP addresses, doing reverse lookups, and maybe finding domain name. But once you do that, do an NS lookup in it, that should hopefully give you some domain controllers. On a few of those, use enum for Linux. This essentially, with this command, sets up a null session and allows you to dump all that data out. And this particular thing will dump out to that text file a bunch of information. Some of you have to look at by hand. One of them you want to look at especially is the account lockout policy. Because what I'm going to tell you to do in a second will cause huge problems in the network, and you will be detected if you don't stay below that threshold. But one of the things this will give you if you have null sessions is how many times can I use a bad password within what amount of time before it will lock accounts. If you lock accounts, help desk is going to get a lot of calls. People will know you're there. So let's say it's 3 failed attempts in 15 minutes. Well, I only tried 2 passwords, and I wait 16 minutes for trying each one of those. And the passwords I try are always something simple. Company name in the year. Let's say if it's a really short password expiration. This isn't really short, but this is a common one. Spring, current year. Fall, current year. So on and so forth. If there's a popular sporting event going on, Super Bowl 2015, if that's what's happening at that particular moment. Those things are super easy to try, as well as a few other ones. But first, I have to get all the accounts out. I can do that with a quick grep command, cut that up, throw it into users, and then I can throw that into a tool called Hydra, and against one of the domain controllers, try my password list. Besides just the password list, a couple other things you can try, and this depends on what the policy is as far as account lockout. You can try the person's account name as the password. You can try a no password at all, which I believe is what the in option is there. And you can try R, which is the reverse of the username as the password. Between these, you can usually find some account, and then you can start scanning as domain user credentials. And once you do that, you'll find much more stuff that's been shared out to everyone, because modern Windows operating system, when you share it to everyone, it's not anonymous. You have to at least be authenticated to the domain. But if you're part of domain users, you're part of anyone. Also, another way of doing it sometimes is there's a tool from Spider Labs called Responder that will sit there and respond to certain naming protocols besides DNS and say, oh, yeah, you're looking for that box? It's me. Go ahead and contact me. Oh, thank you. Here's a challenge response for whatever you're trying to authenticate to. Let me try to crack that challenge response. Depending on how crappy the password is, you throw that into the RockU database of caught passwords. You all heard about RockU? Online service that got its database of passwords popped. Since then, since it's a real-world example of bad passwords and passwords people have used in real life, it's a popular dictionary to use in these sort of attacks. Okay, once you have the credentials, there's a couple ways you can use them. You could join a Windows box to domain or just use the credentials directly in the tool. If you're going to use a Windows tools, though, and you need to use those credentials, sometimes the tool will have a feature in it where you can type in the credentials. The version for one of my favorite SMB scanners doesn't actually work when you try to type in the credentials. So you can do this. Let's say I found some domain credentials. I'm currently not on a machine that's part of the domain. If I want to impersonate them, I could take that password and generate the hash, and then put in the person's username, domain, and the LM hash and the NTLM hash using Windows Credential Editor, and then basically I've become them. So this is a form of pass the hash. Another thing you can do besides this to get credentials, if you can have physical access to any of the machines on the network, walk up to them with a boot disk, boot up, almost guarantee they're not using full hard drive encryption, probably also not locking down what you can and can't boot from. After you booted from them, copy off the SAM and system file. Then you can use like FGDump or Kane enable to dump out the password hash. Once you have the password hash for the local administrator, fill that in there. I guarantee you a lot of machines will probably have that same local administrator. Then you have access to the C $ share on every one of those machines, more than likely. More than likely. Your miles may vary, but these are like super common misconfigurations, which you all are not on camera. How many of you think you all have this misconfiguration at work? Or this problem? No one's raising their hand, but I know. I can't get a witness. I have no chance of being a Southern Baptist preacher at this point. All right. Now, how you can find these machines out there, there's Network Neighborhood, or what used to be called Network Neighborhood. Now it's just Network. I kind of like the old name Network Neighborhood. It's gone through a couple different names, but basically you're talking to the browse master and getting back information about what is sharing resources out there on the network. Oh, you can also use the the command line net view to see some of that stuff. Now, if you want to actually start querying individual IP addresses or you're not on the same local network, you can use some tools from Metasploit. There's something in auxiliary scanners called SMB enum shares. You can use it. It's pretty quick to configure. You basically put in the CIDR notation in all hosts. You set your username. You set your password. Then you set spider shares to true. Gives you a little bit more information, maybe overly verbose. Play around with the settings. Set show files true. Set thread to 100. Threads to 100. Otherwise, it's going to be really slow as it tries one. But keep in mind, depending on how slow the network connection is, you may want to vary that some. Then run. The output will look something like this. This is actually kind of hard for me personally to parse, but you might be able to go through there and based on file name say, ooh, I really want to investigate this share some more. That is their way of doing it. Let's look at some other ways in a bit. This is that text file that it generates for you. That's going to be a little bit easier to parse through. But it gives you an idea of what you have access to. Nmap also has a lot of features. Oh, I think it's Ron Bowes who wrote most of these scripts. But there is an enumeration script in Nmap that you can set up. And you can set up a username and password. You use that particular command line. By the way, these will be in the videos. And also, if anybody wants the slides, just let me know. And I can put them up on someplace where you can download them. My website or probably just the Dropbox feed. You can also set up an SMB hash if you don't have the username and password. Like, let's say you just got a local administrator account by copying the SAM system off. You set the SMB hash instead of the username and password. Oh, actually, well, you'd probably set the username still. But instead of setting the SMB password, you'd set SMB hash. And there's documentation on the Nmap website for using their tool. Now, it gives you output something like this. I personally do not like Nmap for doing this as well as other tools. Yeah, it's one tool, but I don't like the it's not as user-friendly to quickly see what is screwed up on the network. Now, a tool I personally like, it's not open source, but it is freeware, is SoftPerfect's Network Scanner. And it's got a ton of little features. But it will quickly show you what's what as far as file shares. For instance, anything that has a little red exclamation mark, that means as I scan it and with the credentials I have read-write access to that share. If it just shows a normal folder, I have read access. If it had showed a lock icon, it means that, yeah, there's a share there, but I don't have permissions to it. So SoftPerfect Network Scanner, just Google for that. I should put the link in here, shouldn't I? Is awesome. There's a few settings you probably want to set, like set the thread count up higher than default. There's an additional tab. There's something called grab HTTP and FTP server banner. This has nothing to do with file sharing directly. However, sometimes I want to quickly know, well, have you ever used a tool called RAW? I'm trying to remember how they write it out. Basically, it's a rapid web app application assessment tool. You can scan the entire network, and it pulls up screenshots of every web interface. Then you can quick look at those screenshots and say, oh, that looks like a config panel for a Linksys router. Let me visit and see if admin is the default password, username and password. So it's awesome for that, but granted, not directly related to file sharing. And also, there's a setting called Share Enum All. Now, I'd like to demo this. Unfortunately, I seem to have destroyed my router, and I could scan the local hotels, but they have a couple of things going for them. Well, one, it probably wouldn't be the nicest thing to do. Might get me in trouble, depending. And two, they seem to do some kind of host mode isolation, so I'm told, that makes it not so practical. But this is a super easy program to use. Program options I mentioned changing. I've already changed them here. Changed the max threads to something a little higher. Underneath workstation, I didn't mention this in the slides. I usually say look up logged on user. You can do this all with other tools. And I use this in conjunction with Metasploit and say, oh, this user is logged into this machine. I know this user is a domain admin. I try to pop the box from Metasploit. I try to then dump all his passwords with Mimikatz, which is a talk for an entire different time, which is just, that's just a nutty level of cool tool. Dump that, now you're a domain admin. Lovely stuff. Let's see, also underneath, oh, shares. By default, it doesn't say all. I like to turn on all, so I even see administrative shares, like IPC $, C $, all that. That way I also quickly know that account credential I have, which machines am I an admin on. I see, oh, I got C $ access. I'm probably a local admin on that machine at least. And additional, I usually just turn that on, grab those banners, just to see what devices are out there, because another thing I commonly find is some kind of network device that has default passwords. So I see, oh, you got a Xerox printer. All right, let me get into it. Oh, you have your Xerox printer configured to use a certain account to talk to Active Directory to be able to pull usernames so people can like scan stuff directly and send it. So then I use Dale Hyland's passback attack, set up my own LDAP server on my own box, temporarily change their settings on the printer, and then get that domain account. It's all about using a bunch of little things together that I've compromised networks before where I was thinking, you know what, none of these vulnerabilities by themselves rates as critical, but together, I can now control the network. So it's, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. But those are the settings. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to actually, it finally showed up. Hold on a second, guys. I probably don't have a whole lot useful on this network, but if anybody wants to attach to it, you can scan the network, go ahead. Come on, guys. That's attached. Can I go attach? Come on. I don't know if all my hosts have actually attached to it, but let's go ahead and connect to that. And see if any of my other hosts who are in VMs will have gotten to it in a reasonable amount of time. Because I realize we're already running late, and I want to get out of the way for Evan.
Take some time. Evan will run through it. He's already had 20 Red Bulls today.
Woo!
So normal. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm scanning through these. I see my router. I see a box named Answerer. By the way, my box, I change the name automatically every time the machine reboots. I have a script for doing that. But I have a couple shares, test and test2, both of which I have read-write access to. I have some administrative shares here that I can apparently see. Oh, by the way, if you're ever wondering what the icon means, under here, like I said, it's a GUI, and I know GUIs are considered lame, but you can quickly just look at this, and if I'm going to give a recommendation to people for scanning their own network, and I don't want to make it easy on them, I'm going to say, like, administrators of this network, scan your network occasionally with both an account that's not a part of the domain and an account that's just in domain users and see what they can get to. Because if they can get to almost anything that's read-write, you probably have overly permissive shares. But anyway, here's the legend, and it will basically tell you what each thing is. So that's an administrative share. If I double-click on that, I should be able to see the entire contents of that machine. And by the way, I have found boxes where domain users are admins on the entire box. But domain users are an admin on that, local admin on that box. But also some domain admin happens to have been logged into that box recently, and I can steal his tokens or use Mimikatz to pull his passwords out of memory, so on and so forth. And here's another share on a Linux box For some reason, by default, on Ubuntu, there's a couple of revisions behind, I think, but it default shared all the printers it knew about that I had. And here's a couple of only read shares. And let's say this is root. I can't currently get to it, but something is misconfigured with how I set that up, because I set the same password for Bob as I have on this machine. Oh, great. There we go. But that's just a quick look at SoftPerfect's network scanner. Like I said, it's hardly elite, but you can quickly look at it and say, okay, this file share probably has 2 open permissions. You can save out the files. You can load up cited notation if you want to go to file import host names lists. Unable to do it while scanning. Well, almost stopped scanning. Force that to stop. You can actually type in something in cited notation and import your list that way. So you don't have to just input it up here. Oh, also, if you want to put whatever your current network is, you just click this little IP icon, and you choose which network it is you want to scan, if you want to do the entire range. It's just a very convenient tool once you figure out how to use it. Oh, other things that are nice about it is you can right-click, and if I had found a share, let me see. I thought I had one that had port 80 open. Yeah, if you find one that has port 80 open, is this too far? You can quickly right-click on a whole bunch of them, right-click and say, Open Computer as web, and you can quickly go through and ascertain whether or not those web pages are something you want to investigate further. Like that just happens to be the admin interface for my router. Anyway, it's a useful tool for quickly finding stuff. All right. Other tools you might want to know about when messing with open file shares. One is Windows search, and there's all sorts of things you want to search for. Here's a common search string you might want to use. You can use the uppercase OR operator to string a bunch of these together, so you just do one search. But right here I'm looking for password, PW, PSW, PWD, and the extension PHP or ASP or ASPX. What I'm doing here is trying to find any source code out there where put connection strings. And most of the time, people are going to use variable names. Well, those are common variable names anyway. So that'd be a quick way of looking for things. I could also do stuff like SSN, Social Security, credit cards, CC. It depends how much time you have to look through it and how much data is out there. Sometimes you get a file share and you're like, I'm pretty sure this is bad, but I don't know enough about the business use case to say how bad it is. But yeah, here's a file share. Here's what I think's in it. You should probably go fix that. Sometimes it's just installs, where they shared it to everyone read-write. The thing to do in that case, if it's in scope, would be to Trojan those installs. Make a backup copy first, so you have the original EXEs. Trojan those installs, so whenever someone does the install, they're also running, let's say, a version of the interpreter payload, which is set to shovel a shell back to you. Fun stuff. Oh, there's also Regex. Like this is a Regex for looking for social security numbers. There's a couple different tools for Windows side. I mean, if you're using Linux and you just mounted the share, you just use regular old grep. But if you're on Windows and you want to use their stuff, there's grepwin and grep. I've had mixed luck with some of these, and they don't seem as fast as Windows Search for, I believe, with Windows Search being built in and having indexes of things, you'd expect it to be somewhat faster. But this allows you to be a lot more refined as far as using regular expressions to search for strange patterns you might like. There's also something called OpenDLP, and I think Kevin Johnson or one of his coworkers introduced me to this. And this is a system you can set up to actually scan your network for you and look for stuff that might be sensitive, like social security numbers and so forth. Now, there's a few other settings I'd like to talk about as far as tweaking. And I'd also like to talk about a little bit about a game I ran a while back, which I expected to go entirely different, and it went weird because of some strange security settings that Windows has implemented over the last couple of years. Not strange, good, but unexpected results. One of the protections people can do, let's say you own a coffee shop and you want to keep people from scanning each other's open file shares on the network, turn on something that's sometimes referred to as host mode isolation, wireless isolation, host isolation. And unfortunately, this is really not visible on the screen. I'm trying to circle it here. Right here on this particular ASUS router, it's called Set App Isolation. And I would want to set that to yes. The idea behind this is wireless clients can't talk directly to each other. Now, there's times you'd want them to do that. But at a coffee shop, most of the time, you're probably not going to want them to. And this way, if they screw up and have open file shares, your customers aren't attacking each other. Another setting you might want to look at is if you have to, I've heard a shush sound, probably it's me. You're shushing the speaker? What is that? All right. There's so many places where people do not want to make people not be local administrators. Like for political reasons, someone has to be a local administrator, like let's say a doctor or some CEO or something like that. But you still don't want people to use their account if they use a silly password to reach across the network and control that box. Like let's say use PowerShell. PowerShell is awesome because it's already whitelisted, and if you use Metasploit's PSExec PowerShell module, the AV pretty much doesn't matter. You get in that way. But if you want to set it to where they can still be local admins when they log into the machine, but you can't do it over the network, there is a particular registry setting you can set, but it's also, I believe it's in the registry setting also here, but here's where the group policy is, or in this case, the local policy, since this machine's not part of a domain. And you can set deny access to this computer from the network, and you set what users. In this case, I'm setting both guest and the local administrator's account to not have network access. They can log into the machine locally and do anything they want, install anything they want, but just because I have the password doesn't mean I can reach across the network and control these machines. This is also something that could be advantageous if you have a shared administrator account amongst all the machines on the local machines, a shared local administrator account. This could probably partly mitigate that. I'm trying to come up with some better recommendations for automatically scrambling local admin passwords. A lot of people say disable them by default and only use domains credentials for configuring it. So that's sometimes impractical, but you can still generally do that by disabling the local administrator. My understanding is when you restart the machine in safe mode, it's re-enabled by default. Then you can log in, re-enable it for non-safe mode, then just log in. So it adds extra steps, but just disabling local administrator might not be a bad security concern if you have the same local administrator on every single machine. Because if I can get to one of your machines and copy off those hashes, I can probably look at a lot of data. Oh, I've also found the local administrator account, try that password against every machine and every account in the domain, and some IT guy has set his own personal password to be the local administrator password. It happens. Also, LM compatibility level. There's all sorts of levels of authentication. LM compatibility, LAN Manager challenge response is less secure than NTLM or NTLM version 2. It's easier to crack if you happen to be able to get that exchange information. It's not like the password passing in clear text, but it's easier to crack. Now, there's all sorts of levels to this. Back in Windows 10 T4 2000 day, it would send NTLM responses if you try to authenticate, but by default, when it sends its own, well, it looks like in this case, it would send all of them. It got more secure as time went by, and it started dropping off NTLM as it started dropping off LM challenge response because it's easier to crack. So as the operating systems, progressed, they started turning up this setting. However, I noticed in this one game we were running, I was running a capture the flag event of sorts, and I made one of the flags be get access to this Windows 98 box and own its website. And I figured it was going to be super easy. So what I did was I set the C drive, full read-write permissions to everyone. Almost no one got any points on it. And I was like, what's going on here? But somebody off of I think it was an iPhone, started getting points from an iPhone. Here's the deal. That particular box could not accept, because it was Windows 98, NTLM authentication. It could accept LM authentication. However, everybody was using clients too new to actually bother to send LM. They were like, that's insecure, we won't send that. So no one actually got, very few people got any points on that particular box. I just thought that was an interesting thing. My point for this particular talk, though, is for the sake of scanning, you may want to think about setting LM compatibility level to something lower and then setting it back, just so you can get maybe a few of those boxes, because you never know, there might be one of those weird Windows 98 boxes still sitting on your network someplace. And you may not think that it's out there having open shares because you're using a newer, more secure operating system that's just not sending those LM challenge responses. But yeah, do set it back after the fact. Just a thought out there. I don't know how many of those boxes are really out there, but you also notice some old control systems that are still running ancient DOS-based operating systems because, hey, it's still running, it's still been there. I remember there used to be a key system at one place I saw that they actually had to walk around and think with either a Windows 95 or Windows 98 laptop to redo the smart key system because that's what the software would run on. So those things last for a while. All right, here's some links. I have an old article of mine about finding rogue file shares in your network. Finding leaks, that's something from Kevin's group. And also, Nessus will also find open file shares. It's just not as nice to look at as far as quickly finding them. So a lot of times you'll find reports on open file shares, but Nessus also has some features to say, hey, you can connect to this NFS share, which is a talk for another time. I may expand this talk to include it. And it says, hey, you can mount this NFS share. And I have seen NFS shares where it's from the root, complete access, read-write. From that point, start looking into putting your own SSH keys on the box. Finally, a little announcement of events. DerbyCon's coming up next year, September 23rd to the 27th. I believe that's the correct dates. And there's a bunch of other cons I've mentioned to check out. I should add Circle City to that. I haven't as of yet. Nauticon, I'm not sure if it's happening. Outer Zone, okay, that's not happening, unfortunately, I don't think. Of course, SkyDogCon, which is redundant to have that in this slide here, and HackerCon, which is happening in West Virginia a couple of weeks from now. And that's pretty much my talk. Are there any questions?
Hey, Adrian. I'm sorry, it just seemed appropriate in that context.
Yeah, that's basically how Martin Boss sounds when he says, yo, Adrian, or hey, Adrian. Yes?
How did you get so damn sexy?
Partly genetics, a lot of weightlifting, a lot of drinking mead. That's where this sexiness comes from. Any other questions? Well, any other questions? In that case, thank you all very much for your time. I'm going to get all my stuff off the stage.